Consultation, thank you.
Okay. First of all, my name's Michael Ash, for those of you who don't know me, and thank you to Swindon Tenants Voice for agreeing for this to be filmed tonight, and to the people who are taking trouble to click on the video clip next to the explanation on the web as well, so welcome to you. We're going to run through very, as quickly as we can, the implications around the options for rent increases this year. In previous years, we've been led down a track very much dictated by government rules. As you know, this year we're in it's the first year where government rules around council housing and the way we're funded has been changed, and it's something that's called self-financing. It relates to the decision that was made last year by tenants to retain council housing under the new system, where we have ability to retain all of our income and make decisions about how that is invested. So that's the background to it. So we operate a little bit more like our own independent business from the government and the subsidy system that we had in the past, where we were paying subsidy back to the government on an annual basis of a significant amount, many millions. However, the downside of that is that we've had to buy ourselves out of that government system for self-financing, and we've had to pay a significant amount of money to do that and raise a certain amount of debt. We already had £12 million worth of debt, around 12 million. We've had to take on additional debt of 138 million in order to get that independence, if you like. So although we can retain all our rent and all our income, which is over £40 million, we do have a collective debt of about £150 million now. So we do need to be mindful about how we deal with that debt on an annual basis, and also how we use any surpluses that we have to invest in our council housing as well. Because as many of you here will know, on Swindon Tenants Voice, that we have over 40% of our council housing is built using non-traditional methods, and that does create us some difficulties in the fact that we do need to be very mindful of how much we need to invest in those homes. We also have, as a priority, which was again been agreed over previous years, to really start upgrading our sheltered housing as well. We have a lot of sheltered housing in our housing stock. Again, another priority, and we need to be mindful of the investment that we have for that. So, as I said, we're responsible for managing our own debt. That debt comes at a cost of around about £5 million a year in interests. And we made the first decision at the beginning of the year to repay £8 million worth of that debt. The question is how much do we go on in future years to repay that on an annual basis? So we do keep all the income from rents, and of course from service charges and other support charges as well that we have. And in Burbage we'll go into more detail around some of the details on service charges, garage rents, support charges and so on when we get to that in a moment. But obviously the big decision is around what do we do regarding the rent increase for next year, or indeed looking at an option of even a rent freeze. So we have a higher degree of certainty, that's for sure, under self-financing. We know what the position is, we know what the debt is, and for all the work that we've done over the last couple of years, we know the level of investment that we need to make in the housing stock over the next 30 years as well. So we are encouraged to take that longer term business approach to the model of how we fund council housing in Swindon going forward. There are some risks along the way, some of them I've touched on already. And those risks clearly include, I've mentioned the debt management strategy. We've referred to this evening already some really big implications around welfare reform as well, and the fact that benefit rules are changing. And in particular, there are new rules around under-occupancy. So people who are on housing benefit at the moment will be losing benefit money if they are under-occupying their homes. We need to have a look at, I won't go through all of these, but we also need to look at should we borrow more money? We have a little bit more headroom. The government do allow us to borrow a bit more. In fact, our total headroom goes up to about £168 million. But obviously, if we do that, we've still got to we're still going to have the interest costs of that debt, and work out what our strategy is around repayment of that debt as well. So if we go on to the next slide. The options around the whole of the budget, because the budget is impacted with how much the rent does or doesn't go up by, gives us the overall budget for council housing next year. And there's three areas really that we need to have a look at. First one is around the reinvestment in our council housing stock. What do we do in terms of the big improvements, kitchens, bathrooms, roofs, external wall insulation, rewiring, all those big ticket items that you have under that category. The second one is debt repayment, and of course the third one is around a balance between the two, looking at a balance of where we sit under those two. So if we go onto the next slide, we're going to have a look at a number of those options now, and Ian's going to go through those. We will look at 4 scenarios. Those 4 scenarios are at the bottom. We've got a rent freeze. Second one up is an increase in line with the retail price index. Moving up, the retail price index plus 0.5% on the rent. And finally, something called the retail price index plus convergence. In fact, it's moving to the government formula. In fact, in theory, what the government feel that we can afford in order to service the level of debt that we were given at the beginning of the year. So those are the 4 options, and the way we've portrayed them on the slides is to show what, in fact, the loss of income would be to the council on those bottom 3, because the top one is what the government would expect us to charge in order to service the costs, including the debt that we have. Ian will go on in a moment to talk about, you'll see a line on the slides which is called surplus. That sounds quite nice, but in fact by surplus what we mean is the amount that we've got left over once we've got all our day-to-day expenses sorted out, once we've got the day-to-day repairs sorted out. What are we going to have left that we're going to use to pay for those bigger and important capital investment priorities, and whether or not we do pay some of that debt back as well. So this will go on from here. The feedback we get tonight and from the online consultation will all be fed to the decision that Council will be making later in February. It will first of all go to Cabinet on the 6th of February for them to look at it, but because it's so important, it is a full Council decision. Hence the importance of all of these consultation sessions on it. So I'm going to hand over to Ian, who's going to go through a lot more of the detail now.
Okay, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Ian Burbidge. I'm the Finance Manager for Housing, Treasury and Growth. Some of you I know, some are new faces to me. My job, amongst other things, is to keep an eye on the HRA business plan, to make sure that it all works, and to work with the housing team to actually come up with a budget that balances, and to make sure that we deliver the services that you would expect of us. As Mike's already said, we've put 4 different rent options available. And if we start with the most expensive option, as far as tenants are concerned, which is the convergence figure, which is historically the figure that we would have implemented at this time of year under the old formulas that the government were putting forward. That would take our rent up to £42 million per annum. As we can see, we've also put a rent freeze option on there just to show you what the difference between the two income streams are, and that's at £40.4 million. So there's about a £1.9 million difference between the two options. Either of those options are acceptable. Equally, anything in between the two are also possible. We've also put, as Mike's already said, the RPI increase in there, which shows a £900,000 difference between what would normally have been proposed at this time and the income level that would generate, and the same with the RPI and a half. What I'll do is I'll show you what that looks like over a 5-year period. So there are 4 slides set up for this. Each one is different purely by the income streams. So the general principle behind each one is that they all follow exactly the same process, and as Mike's already said, the surplus figure at the bottom is the figure you're looking at, because that's what we've actually got a choice about what we do with, and that's what would then generate the investment programs, the repayment amounts that are available to be used. So to go through quickly, I've put in there no debt repayment on any of these options, so that has got to come out of the surplus at the bottom of the page. But it's got the day-to-day running expenses of the business. As you can see, we've got debt interest in there at just under £5 million. The repairs and maintenance programme, that's the day-to-day taps and washers, windows, door locks and so on, stays at £8 million. Management services, which is the neighbourhood housing officers, all of the back office costs, all of the IT and the infrastructure, the costs that go with that, is £7.6 million. Miscellaneous costs is just a few odds and ends of costs that we incur, that's about £100,000 worth. And then the service chargeable costs, which obviously relate to things like the neighbourhood warden service, the sheltered housing service, the supported housing services, the staircase lighting, multi-storey services if that's applicable, and that comes in at about £6 million. Against that, we've got the rental income, in this case of 42 million under this particular scenario. Void costs, that's when the property's empty. So every time we get between tenancies, we're losing money on that property. Our estimate is that's about £600,000 a year. Bad debt costs, we all know tenants leave and haven't necessarily paid everything. We also have recognised in this year that because of the welfare reform changes coming through, that could go up. And we've recognised that for this year and next year, that we don't know what the impact of welfare reform is, but we know it's going to put pressure on tenants, and therefore we may not get all of the rents that we would expect to have got normally. So we've allowed something to cover that additional cost. The service charge income, that's what we recover back from sheltered schemes and from the tenants, from the various services that you receive. It may look like it doesn't cover its full costs. What I've got to point out to you there is that within the service chargeable costs and the other income line, we've got things like Homeline. Homeline is a service that's provided to council tenants, but is also provided to the public sector, the public at whole. So they can buy that service, and they actually help subsidise the service we provide in-house. So there is a little bit of income that comes in from that. So they do all balance in total, but the income is just shown in different places because of the way we have to report it. And then there is some leaseholder income that shows their contribution towards the cost that we incur. As I say, in this particular instance, it shows 21.9 million. What I'll take you to do now is a summary of all 4 slides, which will actually show you the comparison of the surpluses. So, that's it. So, what this summary is showing you is, if you take various options in terms of the rent, the amount of money you've got available to invest or to repay debt with changes. So, as you can see in year 1, that change could be anything up to £2 million. Again, if you take that over a 5-year period, if you followed the same policy for 5 years and didn't change your policy, that gap could get as big as £27 million over 5 years. So whatever decision you make this year will have a knock-on effect for every year forward. So if we lose you had a rent freeze this year and you saved the £2 million this year, the impact of that would be felt over a number of years. Because obviously once you've lost that £2 million, whatever you do in the following year in terms of inflation or any increases will be on a figure that's a lot lower in the first place. Okay, we can have the next slide. To put that in context for what people can relate to, this is the impact on what you have to pay out from your pocket. This is an average across the stock, so it will not relate to any one property particularly, but it's to give you an indication of what the impact will be at each of those rent levels. So currently our average rent across all the properties is £80.42, and if we went with the convergence figure, which is the top line figure, that would go up to £84.31, which would be a £3.89 a week increase. And as you can see, you've got the other options there as well, so they all show you different levels of increases in terms of the amount of money you've got to find from your pocket to pay for these increases. Okay. I'll move on to service charges now, which is something that probably a lot more people are aware of in terms of things like neighbourhood wardens, multi-stories, sheltered. It's things that you receive in your home that is in addition to the rent that you pay. There are a number of service charges that are rebatable and therefore can be covered by housing benefits, and those, the guidelines say, should be kept in line with the retail price index unless there are exceptional increases in costs. Unfortunately, there are two major elements that are increasing beyond inflation rates this year and have been for a number of years, which are the gas and the electricity costs. The water rates have gone up, but not quite as drastically as gas and electric are going up by. So, unfortunately, the cost increases that we're receiving in terms of what we've got to pay for gas and electric is passed on to the people that are receiving those services from us. So, these are the areas where we get service charges. So the supported and sheltered housing charges, heating and water charges, multi-stories, and the neighbourhood warden service. How do we calculate them? We take the annual cost of providing the service to every property that receives that service. We divide it by the number of properties receiving it, and for this year we're dividing that by 49 weeks. So next year it's a 49-week rent or 53-week rent year, but the service charges and the rents are collected over a 49-week period. So the costs are divided by 49. So to go into the details, the slides are hopefully self-explanatory in terms of what the rents will increase by or what the rates will increase by on these areas. So some areas, as you can see, the water charge actually in sheltered housing has gone down slightly. I know it's not a lot, but it has gone down a little bit. The service charge, however, has gone up, and the heating charges, as we've already said, are going to go up because they are out of our control, unfortunately. I know colleagues who work in the property section are looking with our energy team to see where they can reduce consumption. We can't reduce the cost, but we can look at the consumption of what we actually use to try and reduce the cost that way. For those that are in sheltered schemes, there is a guest flat available, or guest room in most schemes, that can be rented for visitors to come and stay, and we're not proposing to change the charges for those facilities. The supported housing charges, there are a number of different supported housing schemes around the town, and they generally have a service charge. So we can see this year the service charge itself is actually going down, and that's because it's not costing us as much as it was last year to provide. So therefore that saving has been passed on. We don't make any profits out of the service charges. We're not allowed to. So as a consequence, if we can save money, you as tenants will save money as well. So those are the various charges, and obviously those will apply differently to different people in different properties. If you're in the general estates areas, again, a number of different charges that apply. Multi-stories have their own set of charges. If you're in neighbourhood, if you have a communal area in your flats, you pay the higher neighbourhood warden's charge, and if you're in a general property, you pay the lower charge there. Staircase lighting is the electricity used in the communal areas of the staircases where that's applicable. The other cost there you can see, However, anyone who's in the Railway Village, we have cable TV. We've not been notified at this point of an increase from Sky, but obviously if we do get notified of that, we will obviously contact the people that affects, because that will have to be passed on. And going further, again, there are some other smaller schemes where we've got blocks of tenanted general purpose flats that are attached to sheltered schemes, or supported housing schemes. And because of the way they're set up, because the boilers are communal to both parts of the building, they have different service charges because of the way their heating and water is provided to them. Leaseholders, they will be paying their service charges. The multi-storey charge, as reflected in what's happened to tenants, that has gone down for leaseholders as well. The management charges are the annual charge that they pay for management services from the council, and the staircase lighting is also a charge that is paid by them. These will be going to the leaseholder link meetings for their discussion later in this month. The garage and parking charges, we recognise that times are tough out there, so we're actually holding the rents for tenants for parking garages and for parking spaces to what they have been previously. The crossover charges are what it costs us, and it's a recoupment of the costs we incur when putting in a drop curb so that people can park in their front garden. So that is a way of recovering the cost that the council incurs to put those facilities in, and obviously that goes up in line with the costs going up in line every year. For non-tenants, we have kept the prices there the same. We do have a number of vacancies at the moment for garages, but there was also quite a demand in some of the areas for garages, which is one of the reasons why there's a premium price on there. If you're in one of the villages or somewhere like the Railway Village where there's a high demand for garages, we feel it's right that people who are not HRA tenants should pay a little bit more for the privilege of using those parking spaces. Supporting people charges mainly applies to Homeline and people in sheltered accommodation. So these are items that are not covered by housing benefit because they were taken out of the housing benefit system a number of years ago, but there is still funding available through the council to help support some of these costs. So what we receive is a fee from the council general fund to support those who are on housing benefits. So if you're on housing benefit, you will receive a supporting people benefit payment if you've got Homeline installed or if you're in a sheltered scheme. If you're not and you are able to pay your own costs, those are the costs that are included on that scheme. As I say, they are part of the rents that people in those schemes pay for, but obviously they are protected for some members of those communities. We also have a service that some of you may be aware of called Homeline Plus. What this is an addition to the basic Homeline service, and it will provide things like heat detectors or movement sensors within your properties. So if you have people or friends or relatives who are prone to wander in the middle of the night and that's not good for them, then we can put sensors on the doors, we can put sensors in the flats or their houses to make sure that someone is aware that that's happening, and then someone can react to that and deal with the problem before it becomes an issue. However, these are not covered by either housing benefit or supporting people funding. So if they are required for a tenant, they are payable in full by the tenant. And it's also a service we offer to the public as a whole as well, so that we can again help to cover the costs of the service by offering that to as many people in Swindon who want to take that up. And that is the end of the presentation at this point.
Right, just before we go on.